The rain fell like a judgment, relentless and cold, washing the streets of Eastlake in a gray, miserable light. Officer Ben Carter gripped the steering wheel of his cruiser, the rhythmic slap of the wipers a metronome for the rising tension in his gut. Beside him, Rex, his 8-year-old German Shepherd partner, was a coiled spring of alertness. The dog's ears twitched, his head low, tracking every shadow and every scent with a focus that was both a marvel and a comfort. They were more than a team. They were a single unit, their instincts so perfectly aligned they often didn't need words. Call came in as a structural integrity concern at the old West Morel warehouse, Rex, Ben murmured, his voice a low rumble. The dog's tail thumped once against the seat, a silent acknowledgement. Just a walkthrough? Probably nothing. But in this city, nothing was a word that always held a lie. The West Morel warehouse was a skeleton of a building, a hulking ruin of brick and rusted steel on the edge of the industrial district. Its windows were vacant eyes, its corrugated metal siding peeling like dead skin. Eastlake was full of these ghosts of industry, monuments to a better time, now serving as havens for the city's lost and its criminal underbelly. This was there. Domain Ben and Rex exited the cruiser, the dog's paws silent on the wet asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of decay, wet concrete, and something else, something metallic and sharp. Ben's hand rested on the hilt of his weapon, not a sign of fear, but of readiness. Rex moved ahead, a black and tan shadow, his nose to the ground. The interior of the warehouse was a cathedral of gloom, shafts of watery light piercing the dust-filled air through holes in the roof. Old machinery lay scattered like fallen titans. A sound, faint but distinct, echoed from deep within the structure. It was the scraping of metal, followed by a low guttural curse. Ben's blood ran cold. This wasn't an empty building. "Stay close, Rex," he whispered. They moved toward the sound, their steps cautious, their senses heightened. As they rounded a stack of splintered wooden crates, they saw them. 2 men, their faces obscured by ski masks, were using a large, pneumatic cutter on a thick steel girder. The sparks flew, a furious firefly dance in the dim light. Ben recognized the cutter. It was a heavy-duty tool, and they were using it with a frantic, desperate energy. The men froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the noise. The moment their eyes met Ben's, everything happened at once. 1. Man dropped his tool and fumbled for something in his jacket. Rex, without a spoken command, was in motion. A low growl, a flash of teeth, and he was on the man, pinning him to the ground, a growl rumbling in his chest. Ben drew his weapon, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. "Police! Drop it! Hands where I can see them!" The second man, wild-eyed, didn't drop his tool. Instead, he swung the still-running pneumatic cutter, a roaring, jagged arc of steel, toward a supporting beam above them. It was a move born of pure panic, not strategy. The beam, already weakened, gave with a sickening groan. A cascade of dust and debris rained down, and then, with a thunderous crack, the entire section of the ceiling began to collapse. Ben's last conscious thought was of Rex, of a flash of dark fur and a desperate bark. He shoved the dog hard, a last, panicked act of protection. The world inverted in a deafening roar of grinding metal and splintering wood. The ground heaved, a crushing weight descended upon him. Then nothing but blackness, a heavy, suffocating silence filled with the taste of dirt. He was buried. The weight was unbearable, crushing his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. Every desperate intake of breath was a mouthful of dust. Panic clawed at him, a primal, frantic beast. He was pinned, his legs twisted beneath a heavy concrete slab. He tried to scream, but only a pitiful, choked gasp escaped. The world was a black, terrifying box. Then he heard it. Faint at first, a distant scratching sound. It grew louder, more frantic. It was the sound of persistence, of unwavering loyalty. It was the sound of Rex. Rex, having been shoved clear by Ben, had watched the world fall on his partner. For a moment, his primal instincts screamed at him to run, to flee the danger, but a deeper, more profound loyalty overrode everything. He didn't think, he acted. He tore at the rubble, his powerful paws a blur of motion, his frantic barks, echoing his urgency. He ignored the pain as jagged bits of concrete and splintered wood tore at his paws. He followed the faint scent of Ben's breath, the panicked, desperate smell that cut through the dust and rain. He found him, or what was left of his partner, above the rubble. The dog dug, his head low, his body a piston of pure effort. He found a small opening and wedged his head inside, sniffing, whimpering, his wet nose brushing against Ben's cheek. Ben, on the edge of fading out, felt the touch and a surge of fight coursed through him. He was not alone. Rex pulled, he clawed, he strained against a piece of rusted rebar until his muscles screamed. He barked a series of sharp, urgent commands. That seemed to summon the very air back into the void. Finally, with a final Herculean tug, he moved a smaller concrete block just enough to allow Ben to gasp a real breath. That bark, that defiant sound, drew the other officers to their position. They worked with frantic efficiency, but it was Rex who had done the impossible. It was Rex who had found the one crucial air pocket. It was Rex who had kept Ben alive. Ben was pulled from the wreckage, his body a symphony of broken parts. He was rushed to the hospital, his world a kaleidoscope of pain and flashing lights. Rex, too, was taken away. Not to a vet, not at first, but to the department's holding kennel. He was fine, they said. A few cuts, nothing major. The following days were a blur for Ben. Surgeries, tubes, a constant dull ache that was a physical manifestation of the trauma. He asked about Rex. Every time. "How's my boy? Is he okay?" The answers were always vague. "He's fine, Ben, just resting up." Finally, a week later, Sergeant Miller, a man with a face carved from granite and a heart of gold, came to visit. He didn't meet Ben's eyes. "How's the hand, Sarge?" Ben said, trying for a joke. His own arm was in a cast, his legs wrapped in bandages. Miller sighed, a long, weary sound. "Not great, Ben. The men, they don't make them like us anymore." He paused, and a silence descended on the room, heavy and final. Ben knew that tone. He'd heard it before, at funerals and in briefing rooms after a raid went south. It was the tone of a man delivering bad news. "It's about Rex, isn't it?" Ben asked, his voice a whisper. Miller nodded, his eyes finally finding Ben's. "When Rex was digging, a piece of rebar twisted just right. It didn't break a bone, but it tore something. A ligament in his shoulder, something that controls his core movement." He shook his head slowly. "The department's vet did an assessment. They say the injury is permanent. It's not a pain issue, it's a stability issue. He won't be able to handle the stress of the job anymore. He won't be able to pull his weight, so to speak." A cold dread spread through Ben's chest, colder than the East Lake rain. He knew what that meant. "So he'll be retired?" Ben said, trying to force a smile. "I'll take him. We'll get a bigger yard. He can chase squirrels all day." Miller's face was a mask of pain. "That's the thing, Ben," he said, his voice barely audible. "The vet's report. It lists the injury as a permanent liability. They're worried about future lawsuits, the possibility of him not being able to perform, causing a suspect to get away, a liability to the department's resources." He cleared his throat, unable to finish the thought. Ben felt the world tilt on its axis. He couldn't be hearing this right. He tried to sit up, a sharp pain in his chest the only thing keeping him down. "What are you saying, Sarge?" he asked, his voice shaking. Miller finally looked him in the eye, and the raw, unadulterated grief Ben saw there was a mirror of his own. He's not being retired, Ben. He's being put down. The world went silent. The beeping of the machines, the distant hospital chatter, the patter of rain against the window, all of it faded to nothing. The man who had been pulled from the rubble, who had faced death and won, was now staring into a void far darker than any he had ever known. The heroic dog who had given his everything, the partner who had saved his life, was being condemned to death. For his loyalty, for his service, the department had decided his life was a liability. The silence in the hospital room was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. It pressed in on Ben, a heavy blanket of disbelief and horror. He was staring at Sergeant Miller, but he didn't see the man. He saw a cold corporate decree, a bureaucratic death sentence passed on his best friend. "Put down," Miller had said. The words echoed, a cruel final hammer blow to a world that was already in pieces. "No," Ben whispered, the sound raw and broken. "You're wrong. You have to be." Miller's head was bowed, his grief a heavy weight on his broad shoulders. "I wish I was, Ben. I fought it. I told them what Rex did. I told them he saved your life. But the chief, he's on a new budget kick, cutting liabilities. The vet's report was clear. A permanently damaged K9 is a drain on resources. It's a numbers game." "Numbers? He's not a number. He's my partner." Ben's voice cracked and he tried to sit up again, a fresh wave of agony shooting through his chest and legs. The pain was irrelevant. He didn't feel it. He felt only a cold, searing rage. He was trapped, broken, and helpless, while a cold-hearted policy sealed his dog's fate. Miller finally looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, Ben. I know. But the order came down from Captain Evans. He's the one who signed off on the vet's recommendation." Captain Evans. The name was a poison on Ben's tongue. A career politician in a uniform, a man who saw the world through spreadsheets and policy memos. He'd never been on a patrol with a dog whose life he held in his hands. He'd never felt the surge of a partner's loyalty, the defiant courage that had saved Ben's life just a week ago. Evans had never looked Rex in the eye. Ben's jaw hardened. He looked at the casts on his arm and legs, at the tubes and wires connected to his body. They were a prison. He had to get out. "When is it scheduled?" he asked, his voice now low and dangerous. "The report says he's to be euthanized at the end of the week. Friday morning," Miller said, his voice flat. Friday. Ben had 4 days. 4 days to get out of the hospital, to fight the entire system, to save his dog. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a hot, angry path down his cheek. He had been a man who believed in the system, who believed in the rules. But the rules had now turned on him, a weapon in the hands of people who saw a hero as nothing more than a liability. The next morning, Ben was a ghost in his own room. He spoke only to demand his discharge papers. The nurses and doctors argued, citing his extensive injuries, the risk of infection, the fractured ribs that were still knitting. Ben didn't care. He signed the release forms against medical advice, his good hand trembling as he scribbled his name. Miller, who had returned to check on him, simply shook his head and helped Ben into a wheelchair. "I'm driving you home, Ben," Miller said. "No," Ben insisted. "To the station. I need to see Evans." Miller sighed. "Ben, you're not going to win this on your own. He's a stone wall." "Then I'll break it down," Ben growled. "One piece at a time." The East Lake Police Department felt alien to Ben. The hallways were the same, the sounds of radio chatter and ringing phones were the same, but the atmosphere was different. He was no longer a part of it. He was a visitor, an outcast, a man in a wheelchair fighting a war no one else was willing to see. The officers who passed him offered grim, pitying glances. They knew what was happening. They knew the unwritten code of loyalty that was being broken. But they were silent. He found Captain Evans's office on the second floor, a sterile, silent space that felt a world away from the gritty reality of the street. Evans, a slick, precise man with thinning hair and a perpetually starched collar, sat behind a mahogany desk. He looked up, a look of mild irritation on his face. "Ben, I was just about to have Sergeant Miller contact you. You shouldn't be here." "Where is he, Evans?" Ben demanded, ignoring the captain's words. The adrenaline in his system was the only thing holding him upright. "Where's Rex?" Evans adjusted a paper on his desk, his movements slow and deliberate. "Officer Carter, I understand you're upset. This is a difficult situation. But the decision has been made. The K-9 is no longer fit for duty. He has sustained a career-ending injury, and the department cannot risk the liability." "Liability? He saved my life." Ben's voice was rising, echoing in the quiet office. "He's a hero." "He's an animal, Officer Carter," Evans said, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "A tool, a piece of department property, and that property is now broken. The risk of him failing during an operation, leading to a suspect's escape or worse, another officer's injury, is too great. The city's lawyers were very clear on this. The report is ironclad." "Let me see the report," Ben said, his voice shaking with fury. Evans hesitated for a moment, then gestured to a file on his desk. "It's a standard K-9 vet report. Nothing you haven't seen before, but it's final." Ben's good hand, still trembling, reached out and took the folder. He opened it, his eyes scanning the technical jargon. The vet's name was Dr. Helena Vance. Ben had met her, a professional, thorough woman who had been with the department for years. He skimmed past the notes on the cuts and bruises and found the section on the shoulder. Torn supraspinatus ligament, likely a permanent stability issue, not a candidate for surgical repair. Permanent liability. It all seemed to be there, the cold, unfeeling data. But as he looked at the details, something caught his eye. A number, a case number listed as the reason for the injury. CR 73492. Ben knew that number. It was the case number for the raid on the West Morel warehouse, the number for the case where he had been buried. He saw another number too, a smaller one scribbled in the margin. CR 73493. Ben recognized the number as a case for a drug bust that had gone sideways a few months ago, a case where Evans had been scrutinized for mismanaging a unit. Ben had been there too, and Rex had been fine. "I want Rex's full medical file," Ben said, his eyes still on the paper. "This is all you need to know, Officer Carter," Evans said, a new edge in his voice. "The department has moved on. It's a closed matter." Ben looked up, a cold, hard glint in his eyes. "No, Captain, it's not. Not until Friday. Until then, he's still my partner." Ben pushed himself back from the desk, wheeled himself out of the office, and into the harsh light of the bullpen, the file clutched in his hand. Later that evening, after being dropped off at his small apartment by Sergeant Miller, Ben was alone. His apartment felt hollow, an empty shell without the happy, constant presence of his dog. He pored over the report, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion. The number CR 73493 was the problem. It shouldn't be there. He knew Rex hadn't been injured in that bust. He'd been there. He saw Rex the next day, and he was completely fine. But here, in the report, it was listed as a contributing factor, a pre-existing condition that made the current injury permanent and irreversible. He picked up his phone, his injured hand making the simple task a monumental effort. He needed to talk to the one person who could give him the truth. He called Dr. Vance, the department's vet. It was late, but he knew she'd answer. She was a professional. "She was a friend? Helena? It's Ben. Ben Carter." "Ben! My God, I heard what happened. How are you?" Her voice was warm, full of genuine concern. "I'm alive, thanks to Rex. But Helena, I need to know about his report. I saw it, and it says he had a pre-existing injury from the bust back in February. I was there. He was fine." A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Ben could hear her breath, a sharp intake of air. Ben, I'm so sorry. I I can't talk about this. I'm not allowed to. Helena, please, Ben pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. They're going to put him down. I need to know what's in that report. I need to know why. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Ben. It's out of my hands. The report was altered. I didn't write that part. I tried to protest, but they said it was for the good of the department. I was told to comply or lose my job. They had a signed affidavit from Captain Evans and the chief. They had a lawyer. Ben, I couldn't do anything. The world tilted again. But this time, the shock was replaced by a cold, searing clarity. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bureaucratic formality. It was a lie. A calculated, evil fabrication meant to get rid of a dog that had become an inconvenience. It was a crime. And Ben, the man who was trained to uphold the law, was now on the outside, a broken warrior fighting a system that had turned on him. His fight wasn't just to save Rex's life, it was to prove that his life and his partner's sacrifice was worth more than a number on a forged report. The phone clicked dead, but Ben didn't notice. He was already on a new path, a path of vengeance and justice. The fire in the ashes had just been lit. The Eastlake rain had stopped, but a new storm was brewing inside Ben Carter's small apartment. It was a storm of cold, focused fury. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was a fire. A calculated lie had been built on his and Rex's sacrifice, and now Ben was going to burn it down. He looked at the medical report, the case number CR 73493 mocking him from the page. It was a phantom, a ghost of a case that was being used to condemn his partner. Ben knew what his first move had to be. He needed to get Rex out of the department's kennel. He called Sergeant Miller, his voice low and tight. Sarge, I know it's a lie. The report, it was altered. I just talked to Dr. Vance. A beat of silence on the other end of the line. Ben, you shouldn't have done that. You're making things worse for her. I don't care, Ben said, the words coming out as a growl. They're going to kill my dog, and they're using a lie to do it. Evans is covering something up. The report mentions a pre-existing injury from the bust in February. Rex was fine. I was there. Miller's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. The one where Evans's unit got pinned down and a suspect got away? That's the one, Ben confirmed. Something's not right. But none of that matters if Rex isn't here on Friday. I need you to help me get him out. There was another long pause. Ben knew what he was asking was a career-ending move for Miller, a man who had only ever known the inside of a squad car and the rules of the force. Ben, that's grand theft. It's a criminal offense. It's a rescue, Sarge. Ben corrected, the edge in his voice sharpening. A justice! They want to kill him for a lie. We can't let that happen. Not after what he did. Miller sighed, the sound of a man standing at a crossroads. He had known Ben for 15 years. He had seen the bond between the man and his dog. He had seen the integrity of both of them. Give me a few hours. I'll make some calls. I can't promise anything. A few hours turned into an eternity of silent dread for Ben. He sat in his apartment, a prisoner of his own injuries. The world, outside a blur he could only see through a pane of glass. Finally, Miller called back. Okay. The sergeant's voice was tense, the words clipped. Here's what we're going to do. The city's holding kennel is a mess. The evening watch is a skeleton. Crew, we'll need a vehicle, something unmarked, and we'll need to do it at exactly 2 a.m. That's when the new guard takes over. He's a rookie, still getting the lay of the land. Ben felt a surge of hope, a fragile, desperate flame. What about my injuries? I can't drive. I'll drive, Miller said. And I'll handle the paperwork. I'll get you a set of temporary badges and a key to the kennel. We'll tell them we're performing an unscheduled vet check. It's a risk, Ben. If we get caught, it's all over for both of us." "We won't get caught," Ben said with a certainty he didn't feel. He knew the risk. But the alternative was unthinkable. The plan was as simple as it was reckless. At 1:45 a.m., Miller arrived in his personal pickup truck. Ben, a ghost of his former self, was wrapped in a hoodie, his casts hidden from view. The pain was a constant. Screaming passenger, but Ben ignored it. They drove in silence, the weight of their conspiracy hanging between them. The city's kennel was a concrete bunker, a sterile, brutal place where the sounds of lonely dogs echoed in the night. The rookie guard was young, nervous, and flustered by Miller's sudden appearance. He took Miller's forged documents, his eyes darting between the sergeant and the quiet, shadowed figure in the truck. "Unscheduled vet check?" the rookie asked, his voice wavering. "At this hour?" "The captain wants the K-9 looked at." "Something about a new liability report," Miller said, his voice as smooth as steel. The lie was so close to the truth it was almost believable. "We need to get him in and out." The rookie, intimidated by Miller's seniority and the official-looking papers, gave a hesitant nod. He led them down a long, echoing hallway to Rex's kennel. When Rex saw Ben, the change was instantaneous. The dog, who had been lying in a dejected lump in the corner of his cage, sprang to his feet. A low, happy whimper, a mix of relief and joy, escaped him. He pressed his wet nose against the bars, his tail a blur of motion. Ben reached through the wire, his good hand scratching the soft fur behind the dog's ears, whispering words of comfort and promises. The rookie unlocked the cage, and Rex, without a moment's hesitation, moved past Miller and planted himself squarely beside Ben, his body a solid wall of loyalty and affection. He knew exactly who had come for him. They got him into the truck, a silent, tense operation. They drove through the empty streets, the only sound the low rumble of the engine and Rex's soft panting in the back. They dropped Rex off at Miller's farm, a quiet, peaceful place on the outskirts of the city. Ben, in his state, could not care for him. For now, the dog was safe, but they had a larger problem. The conspiracy was real, and it was a lie designed to end a life. Miller, shaken by the audacity of their plan, was now all in. "Okay, Ben," he said once they were back in the truck, the quiet of the night a cloak around their secret. "We have to figure out why Evans did this. The case number, CR 73493, the February bust. Something happened there, something that Evans is trying to keep buried. You were there, Ben. What do you remember?" Ben closed his eyes, replaying the chaotic memory of that night. It had been a drug bust in a rundown apartment complex, a tense standoff. Evans had been in command, but he had frozen, unable to give clear orders. Ben and Rex had cornered the suspect, a low-level dealer named Marcus Thorne, in an alley. But before they could make the arrest, a stray bullet from a rival gang, not from the police, had shot the suspect in the leg. Thorne had collapsed, and in the confusion the drugs had vanished. The case had been closed, the suspect charged with a lesser crime, and the missing evidence was simply swept under the rug as a chain of custody error. "The drugs," Ben said, a cold, sickening realization dawning on him. "The drugs went missing. The evidence. We cornered him. But when he went down, the bag of heroin just disappeared. The report said it was a custody error." Miller's face was grim in the dim light. "I remember that. Evans took a lot of heat for it. He was under review." "But Rex was fine. He wasn't hurt at all," Ben insisted. "So why would Evans lie about an injury from that case? Why would he tie it to Rex now?" A cold, hard truth began to form in Ben's mind, a terrible puzzle piece that fit into place with a sickening click. The drugs hadn't disappeared. Evans had taken them. He had been so panicked about the review that he had covered it up, used the custody error as a pretext to hide the missing evidence. But he needed a permanent scapegoat, an excuse to protect himself. And he couldn't have Ben or Rex around to expose the truth. Rex had been the witness. Rex had been there when the drugs vanished. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Ben had believed in the rules, in justice, and in the system he had sworn to protect. Now, he was an outlaw, on the run with his dog, all because he and Rex had been too close to a truth that a man in power wanted to bury. Evans hadn't just tried to get rid of a liability, he had tried to silence a witness, and in doing so, he had created an enemy he never saw. The quiet of Miller's farm was a stark contrast to the chaotic world Ben Carter had just left behind. It was a temporary sanctuary, but Ben knew it wouldn't last. Captain Evans was not a man to accept defeat, and the disappearance of Rex from the city kennel would be a direct challenge to his authority. Ben, now a broken man in a stolen truck, knew he was no longer an officer of the law. He was a fugitive, and his former comrades would be the ones hunting him down. Miller, a man who had spent his life following orders, was now living in a world of his own making. He sat at his kitchen table, a strong, silent presence, staring at a mug of coffee as if it held the answers to all their problems. "He's going to come for us, Ben," Miller said, his voice flat. "The moment he finds out Rex is gone, he'll issue a warrant. He'll say you're unstable, that you took a department asset. We'll be labeled as criminals." Ben, his body aching with every movement, sat across from him. "Let him," he growled, the pain in his voice a mix of fury and exhaustion. "He's the one with the crime to hide. We just need to find the proof." They had only one lead, Marcus Thorne, the low-level drug dealer from the February bust, a man who had vanished after his release. Ben pulled out his phone, his good hand fumbling with the screen. He pulled up the old case file, the details seared into his memory. Thorne had been a small-timer, a scared kid caught between rival gangs. He wouldn't have been a match for Evans, unless he had something on him. "We need to find Thorne," Ben said, his eyes scanning the file. He was the one who was shot. He was the one who was there when the drugs disappeared. "He's the key to this whole thing." Miller's face was etched with doubt. "Thorne's been off the grid for months. After he got out, he went dark. He's probably halfway across the country by now." "No," Ben said, his voice filled with a desperate certainty. "He's still here. I know his type. He's running, but he's running scared. Evans knows he could talk. He wouldn't have let him leave the city. He's probably hiding somewhere in his old neighborhood, waiting for the heat to die down." Ben was right. The city was a maze of shadows and forgotten places. It was a world he knew intimately. Miller, still a cop at heart, provided the resources. He dug through his personal contacts, calling in favors from old informants, risking his career with every whispered question. The information trickled in, a slow, agonizing process. The word on the street was that Thorne was indeed still in Eastlake, but he was a ghost, a legend whispered in the shadows. He had a sister, Maria, who lived in a decrepit apartment building in the city's industrial core. It was their only lead. The drive into the city was a tense, silent journey. They passed patrol cars on every corner, their blue and red lights a constant mocking presence. Ben felt the weight of every passing stare, every judgmental glance. He was no longer one of them. He was a target. They found Maria Thorne's apartment in a grim, gray building with peeling paint and broken windows. It smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The door was answered by a young woman with a face worn beyond her years. When Ben, in his hoodie and casts, introduced himself as a former police officer looking for her brother, she slammed the door in his face. "Get out of here, pig!" she screamed through the closed door. "We don't talk to cops." Ben didn't move. He stood there, a ghost of the man he once was, and he knocked again, gently. "I'm not here to arrest him, Maria. I'm here because he's in danger. The same people who put him in the hospital are still out there. They lied about the case. They lied about the missing evidence. They're trying to get rid of a witness. A witness who happens to be my dog." He heard a key turn in the lock. The door opened a crack, and Maria looked out at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "Your dog?" Ben nodded, and in the background, Miller stood silently, his hands in his pockets. "My dog Rex. He was there. He saw what happened, and now they're trying to have him put down to keep him quiet. I think they're trying to silence your brother, too. You and Thorne are the only two people who know the truth." Maria's eyes widened, and the fear in them deepened. She hesitated for a long moment, then opened the door. Her apartment was small, cramped, and smelled of cheap food. Her brother, Marcus Thorne, was sitting in the corner, his face pale and haggard. He was much younger than Ben remembered, a boy playing a man's game. "You're crazy," Thorne said, his voice a dry whisper. "Evans is a captain. He's a monster. You think I'm going to talk to you? The last time I talked to a cop, I got a bullet in my leg and lost my stash. Evans told me to keep my mouth shut or the same would happen to my sister." "He's a liar," Ben said, his voice low and firm. "The drugs didn't disappear. He took them. The case was closed so he could cover it up. The police report on the drugs was just a smokescreen. He's hiding something else, something bigger than just a stash of heroin. He's just trying to bury his own dirty little secret." Thorne looked at him, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. He had lived in this world of lies for too long. He knew how it worked. "The drugs aren't all he took," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "When he searched my bag, he didn't just take the heroin. He took my phone. I had a picture on it, a picture of a ledger I took from the place where I was working before. It had his name on it. It had the names of some of his guys. And it had numbers. It had everything. I don't know what it meant, but I knew it was bad." Ben's mind reeled. It wasn't just a stolen stash. It was a ledger. It was a conspiracy. It was something so big that Evans would risk everything, even a man and his dog, to keep it quiet. He and Miller looked at each other, and a single, silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about justice for Rex. It was about cleaning out the rot in their own department. "Where is it?" Ben asked, his voice now a command. "Where did he go with the phone?" "He went to a storage locker in the city," Thorne said, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate fear. "He told me he would be back later to kill me if I didn't keep my mouth shut. He's probably still there getting rid of it. The locker number is B12 at the public storage unit on 4th Street. Ben looked at Miller, and Miller nodded. "We have to go, now." They were no longer running. They were hunting. They were heading into a trap, a dangerous place where Evans, their former superior, would be waiting for them. But they had to go. They were the only ones who knew the truth, and they were the only ones who could put an end to the corruption. This part of the story introduces a crucial new character, Marcus Thorne, and reveals the true extent of Captain Evans's crime, a conspiracy far larger than just stolen drugs. The ending of this part serves as a powerful call to action, with Ben and Miller now on the offensive, heading toward a final, direct confrontation with Evans. The tension has escalated to its highest point, with the stakes no longer just about Rex's life, but the very integrity of the Eastlake Police Department. Let me know if you would like me to write the next and final part of this story. The public storage facility on 4th Street was a ghost town, a labyrinth of steel doors and silent corridors under the sickly yellow glow of a single street lamp. The air was heavy with the smell of damp concrete and forgotten things. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the constant ache in his body. He and Miller drove past the rusted chain-link fence, a cold knot of dread tightening in Ben's gut. This wasn't a mission. It was a reckoning. They found locker B12 deep in the complex, tucked away in a shadowed corner. The padlock was gone, and the heavy metal door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation to a trap. Ben looked at Miller, his eyes filled with a grim certainty. "He's here," he whispered. Or he was. Miller drew his weapon, his face a mask of practiced calm. "Stay. Behind me, Ben. We don't know what we're walking into." They pushed the door open, the sound echoing in the silent corridor. The locker was a barren, empty space, a rectangle of pure nothingness. There was no ledger, no phone, nothing, only a small, blinking red light in the corner. Ben's eyes went to it, a security camera, a live feed. Evans had been watching them. Cold, mocking laugh echoed from behind them. "Well, well, Officer Carter," Captain Evans said, stepping out of the shadows. He wasn't alone. 2 other officers, men from his old unit, stood beside him. Their faces were impassive, their hands on their holsters. Evans was smiling, a cruel, triumphant smirk that sent a shudder down Ben's spine. "You were so predictable, so noble. I knew you'd come, but you came for nothing." "Where is it, Evans?" Ben demanded, his voice a low growl. "The phone, the ledger, the proof." "Gone," Evans said, his smile widening. "Destroyed. And now you're caught, breaking and entering, tampering with an active police investigation. You're a criminal, Carter. You're broken, you're desperate, and now you're going to jail. Both of you." He gestured to one of the officers. "Sergeant Miller, your career is over. You're aiding and abetting a fugitive." As the other 2 officers moved to block their exit, Ben felt a sense of utter hopelessness. He was right about Evans, about the conspiracy, but it was all for nothing. He was a man with a broken body and an empty hand, facing an enemy who had the weight of the law on his side. He had failed Rex. But then, a different sound cut through, the silence. A low, insistent growl that came from behind Evans. The captain's smile faltered. His head snapped back, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated fear. "Rex!" Ben screamed, his voice a frantic mixture of relief and disbelief. Rex, whom Miller had hidden in the back of his truck, had followed them, his instincts overriding all training and commands. He had tracked Evans's scent from the moment they left, the truck. Now he stood there, a blur of muscle and black fur, his eyes locked on Evans. The dog's low growl was not a threat. It was a warning. It was the sound of an unseen witness, a silent guardian who was about to turn the tide. "Stay back! Get back!" Evans yelled, his hands fumbling for his weapon. But Rex was already in motion. He didn't attack. He went for the officer to Evans's right, a clean, sharp movement that knocked the man off balance and sent his weapon skittering across the floor. Then with a fierce bark, he circled back, his focus now on the 3rd officer nipping at his legs, causing him to stumble and fall. He was a force of controlled chaos, a diversion that no one had seen coming. In the ensuing chaos, Ben saw his chance. Evans, a man used to the safety of his desk, was completely flustered. He was staring at the dog, his face a mask of panicked rage. And in that moment, as Evans fumbled for his weapon, Ben saw a small silver object in his other hand. It was a burner phone, the evidence. Ben, his body screaming in protest, used his good arm to launch himself at Evans, tackling him to the ground. The force of the impact sent a fresh wave of agony through Ben's fractured ribs, but he didn't care. He landed on top of Evans, his good arm grappling for the phone. Evans fought back, a desperate, panicked struggle, but Ben's fury was a strength Evans had never known. "You're not going to win, Carter," Evans hissed, his breath hot on Ben's face. "I'll have you and your dog killed." But it was too late. Ben's hand closed around the phone, and with a final desperate shove, he wrenched it from Evans's grip. Just then, a patrol car, alerted by the commotion, rounded the corner. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene. Ben, a broken man on the ground holding a phone, Miller with his weapon drawn, and Rex standing triumphant over the two officers he had disabled. The cavalry had arrived. The aftermath was a blur of police reports, internal investigations, and the quiet, shameful march of Captain Evans and his men into the back of a squad car. The ledger on the phone was the final piece of the puzzle, a meticulous record of bribes, illicit drug, sales, and a network of corruption that reached far higher than anyone had imagined. It was a scandal that rocked the entire Eastlake Police Department to its core. Ben was cleared of all charges. Sergeant Miller was not only cleared, but hailed as a hero for his courage. And Rex, the hero who had saved his partner's life twice over, was now a legend. The department, in a move to save face, paid for all of Rex's vet bills, including extensive physical therapy that would restore his shoulder to near-perfect condition. He was officially retired, given a hero's farewell, and the new chief, a man with a real sense of honor, personally handed Rex's papers over to Ben, making him Rex's legal owner. The story ends with Ben, still recovering, sitting on the porch of his small house. The sun is shining, and the Eastlake rain is a distant memory. Rex is beside him, a happy, peaceful presence, chasing squirrels in the yard. The dog, a living testament to loyalty and love, had not been a liability. He had been the key to justice. Ben had faced the betrayal of a system he believed in and had won. The heartbreak of that betrayal was real, but it had been healed by the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. This concludes our story. I hope you're happy with the dramatic and satisfying